Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Daf Yomi in Kesuvos Daf Mu. It's Kesuvos Daf Mu, and there's actually a really interesting thing. In about a year, just about a year, Rabosai, we'll be in Nizikin, and we'll be on Bava Kama Daf Mu. Does anyone know what's on Bava Kama Daf Mu? Just trivia, if you happen to know.
Good luck.
Good luck? Okay. Bava Kama Daf Mu. Ashur, good. Ashur Shenagach Esapara. The chapter Ashur Shenagach Esapara starts on Daf Mu. Okay, Hashem has a sense of humor. The publishers of Gemara have a sense of humor, but not only that, but it actually makes a difference if the cow there mooed or not. We'll give you a little preview. So what happens is, if the cow is pregnant and somebody's bull attacks the cow, now if that attack, the physical attack, made the cow miscarry, then the guy who owns the bull has to pay for the vlad, the offspring that's lost also. But if it wasn't the attack itself, but it was the bull charging that made her have the miscarriage, then they wouldn't have to pay for it. So it really does make a difference if the cow said moo or not in apprehension of the bull's attack. So Bava Kama Daf Mu, that's a preview, but Baruch Hashem, today we're on Daf Mu in Kesuvos still. We are deep into the heart of the Nashim. Well, you ask your wives if you're deep into the heart of the Nashim, but Baruch Hashem, in the Kesuvos at least, we're deep into the heart of Nashim on Daf Mu. I wanted to backtrack a little bit to the Chumash, because we're going to see a lot of psukim today about Motzi Shemra. So in Ki Tzeitzei, now Ki Tzeitzei is just in 3 weeks for both sides. So this is 3 weeks coming attraction. You still have to do Shnai Mikra, even though I'm going to read you some psukim. But in 3 weeks we're going to read Ki Yikoch Ish Isha Uvolei Osnea. A man marries a woman and he is intimate with her and then he hates her. Now that hate is mitzvah gereris mitzvah, avera gereris avera. The Psalm law, he places on her alilos divarim, wanton words, accusing words. V'hotzi alei shemra. He brings upon her a shemra, a bad reputation, a bad name, this accusation of infidelity. V'mar esaisha zos lakachti. I took this wife, I married this wife. Ve'krav alecha. I came close to her. Lo matzati lo betulim, and she was not as advertised. Now, obviously, Rabosai, if you're laughing, but I'm making a good point here. Obviously, if he had gone into the marriage with the knowledge that this woman had certain premarital experience, then he would not be allowed to make this accusation, because we'd say, yeah, you knew that going in. It's when the woman or her father is misrepresenting her personal history, and so he thinks that she's one type of girl, and it turns out she's a different type of girl, and he didn't know that. Then he's making this accusation based on the fact that if that event happened during their betrothal after Kedushin, when she's an Eish Ish, then she's Chayiv Misa. Then she gets the death penalty because that would be adultery. If something happened before they ever got betrothed, before the Kedushin took place, that's not Chayiv Misa. We don't punish a woman for having experiences before she gets married. That's not ideal. I don't want the guys to run with this. Are there single guys in the audience here? Baruch, everyone's married. Baruch Hashem, we're golden. But anyway, many things, don't run with that. That's still not, that's not OU certified. However, no one gets the death penalty for that kind of behavior. It's only if that happened during the betrothal, after she's an Eish Ish, then it's the death penalty, okay? So she misrepresented herself. He thought she was Betula Lagamre. It turns out she wasn't, or at least he thinks she wasn't, or he just hates her and he's making things up. So he takes her to court. V'lokach avia naira ve'ima, okay. So what does he do? V'lokach avia naira ve'ima, so the parents of the girl, they come and they hotziu at betuli nara. They spread out the betulim of the nara. Now that's obviously physically impossible. So today the Gemara is going to explain what this really means. El zikneir, to the elders of the court, hashara, to the gate, to the court. V'amar via nara l'zikanim et biti natali ishazei. I gave my daughter to this man l'isha v'isnaya. He just hates her. It's not true what he's accusing her of. He hates her. V'hinei hu samalilo dvarim, and he's making this wanton accusation, this false accusation on her. Le'mor le'matzati le'bitcha betulim. I didn't find for your daughter betulim. Ve'ela betulei biti. And here's the betulim. Farsua simla. He spreads out the sim law. We're going to have two explanations in the Gemara today what this means. Livnei zikneir. So they prove it in court. V'lahu zikneir ahu et isha v'yisra et ish v'yisroto. And then, since it was a false accusation, they punish him. V'anshu oto. And they also punish him again. Yisru v'anshu. We're going to see in today's Gemara what this means. Meya kesef, $100. Now this is 100 silver coins. If you recall, the mohar besulos was how much? Come on, guys. 102. Okay, so good. So the ksuva is 100 zuz or 200 zuz, depending if she was a basula or not. But this mohar betulot in biblical coins was 50. Was 50 coins. That was, remember, the penalty for the ma'anis and the fata was 50, and here it's 100, which is really interesting. One explanation I've seen for this is because he's trying to steal from her the kesuva. So if someone's trying to steal, they have to pay back kefil, they pay back double. So he has to pay 100, it's double the 50, which was the typical mohar betulot, the typical dowry to a virgin girl. Not Olivia Naira gives to the father, explain why today. Ki hotzi shemra ol betulat Yisrael. He has defamed a betula, a maiden of Yisrael. Lo tiye l'isha, and he has to keep her as a wife. If she wants to keep him around, then she can make him keep her. Lo yichol shol lo yamad, can't send her away. So this is the psukim that are motzi shemra, and it's, as we said yesterday, it's a chiddush Torah. This is not the normal din of the Torah. It's a chiddush. It only applies in certain circumstances. We said it applied to a na'ara, not a ketana. We learned that out yesterday. So today we're picking up the very top of Mu with Rav Papa. Now remember, yesterday we said that the man, the husband who's making these wanton accusations, false accusations, he always gets whipped. Even according to Rabbi Yehuda, he always gets whipped. Even if he was not bought aleha, even if he did not do what the psukim or mashma he has to do, which was try to actually sleep with his new wife, and then he comes to court and says, listen, she was not as advertised. Okay, so we understand there has to be some sort of contact first, according to Rabbi Ben Yaakov and Rabbi Yehuda. But Rabbi Yehuda says we whip him no matter what, but he only pays the 100 kesef fine if he actually lived with his wife and then makes a claim about her betulim. But we're always going to whip him. Whether that's because of lo telech rochil, which is allowed in the Torah, don't be a talebearer, or we're going to whip him malchus mardus because the rabbis are allowed to whip people who are being very unsneous and very wanton and showing up to court with bizarre accusations. So good, at the top of Mem Vav, Rav Papa Amar, my bol loke. What does it mean the husband gets whipped? Dikatane chasam, that we said in the Spraisa. So even if he did not live with the new wife, he still gets hit. How? Mamam, getting hit in mamam. V'kari leila mamon malchus. Is getting hit in the pocketbook called getting hit in? Yes, it is. B'hatnan, the Mishnah teaches, ha'omer chotzi erki alai. Someone says, half of my value is upon me. I'm chayav to pay half of my erech. Recall the Torah has fixed amounts for valuation depending on age and gender and certain criteria. A person has an erech set in the Torah where if he says erki alai, he has to donate that amount to the Beis HaMikdash. Obviously, we're not making a judgment of who's more valuable, what age brackets are more valuable, but the Torah fixes this, that he can say his erech if he wants. So you can always donate as much as you want. Rabosai, we got a big pile of dirt next door. The building fund could use donations. Anything you want. It doesn't have to be your erech. It could be chatzi erech. It could be any amount you want. We always appreciate it. Daf Yomi always appreciate all the sponsorships. Baruch Hashem for all of you. Did I say sponsor? Oh my God. Wow. I was just saying. I didn't say sponsorships, and it just came up in the Daf Yomi. So you see how much Hashem loves us. TALMUD TORAH sponsorship by Paul and Kathy Pollack in honor of the grandchildren, Tikva Esther, Simcha, Avigayil, Milana and Milicenta. May they grow to become the best versions of themselves. Daf Yomi Shir sponsored the Zechut refuah Shleima for Yehuda Ben Michal, my son. I want to thank you all for all of your help and kind words. Week of Learning sponsorship by Binyomin, Fleischman, in memory of Rabbi Shmuel, Yudel Ben Binyomin, Yaakov, and by Selma Woolf, with immense gratitude to Hashem and to all those who joined in prayer for refuah for Dr. Kari Davis, the granddaughter of Selma Woolf, who Baruch Hashem was granted the gift of life. We should all be gesund ad mei of Esrim Shana, God willing. But you talk about sponsorships, and Baruch Hashem. See, Hashem saves me a lot of trouble. Thank God. Good. So a guy can give his erech. He can give chotzi erech. Noten chotzi erko. He has to give half of his erech. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer loke. He gets hit. And we think loka means lashes. But noten erech shalom. He gives his full value. Loke amai. What do you mean? We hit him? We lash him? What are we talking about? Amar Papa loke be'erech shalom. No, we mean hit in the pocketbook. We mean when someone says, I want to give half my erech, we hit him in the pocketbook in the sense he has to pay the full thing. My time of why would we do this? Why can't he just pay a half? Gezerah, it's a gezerah, chatzi erko ati erech chetzia. Because if a guy says chetzi erko and he's worth 50, okay, we'll let him pay 25. But if a guy says erech chetzia, the value of half of me, so how do you do that? You cut him in half and you assess like what? The bottom half, top half, left half, right half. I mean, that's kind of odd. So erech chetziav havele ever shneshama teluyabo. So if you have half of a human being, somewhere in there's a vital organ. A person can't live half a life. You know, God forbid. Any way you slice it, a guy can't continue going with half of his body. So if someone says erech chetziav, he really means his full erech. But it would be confusing if he says chatzi erki, erech chetziav. So we make him pay full. He gets hit in the pocketbook. He pays everything. It's a beautiful reminder that when we make a Sher Yatzar, we thank Hashem for all of our bodily organs, that without all of our organs functioning as Hashem intended, it's hard to live. It's tough. There's Yisurin, and it really makes us stop and appreciate Baruch Hashem when things work. Baruch Hashem when we get out of bed on our own 2 feet. Baruch Hashem. That's a beautiful thing. Tanu Rabbanan va'anshu oso. I just read the Pesukim, Rabbi Sai. Va'anshu oso. They punish him, the husband who made these bad accusations. Ze mamon. That's money. V'yisru oso. And they give him Yisurin. They give him Musar. Ze Mulkus. Now we might have thought they just give him Musar, they make him read Mesilas Yesharim. No, we give Mamash, we give him Mulkus. That'll help the Mesilas Yesharim to sink in. Bishlama v'anshu ze mamon. Understand, we punish him, that's money. Dichsi v'anshu oso mea kesef. The pasuk continues, they punish him 100 kesef. Again, that's double, that's kefil of the typical dowry. Not nulavia nara, they give it to the father of the maiden who was defamed. Ela v'yisru ze malchus minal. And how do you know it's malchus? Amar Rabbi Abahu lamdainu yisru mi yisru. We learned a comparison, a hekesh. Yisru here, from Yasru over there. V'yasru mi ben, uben mi ben mi bin. Now bin, there's a pasuk v'haya im bin hakot harasha. This is by the court if they find that one person is liable, and it's liable something with malchus. The pasuk says v'haya im bin hakot harasha. Doesn't have to say bin. Bin means son. Like in the category of makos is the evil doer. So then we give him lashes. But bin the Rasha, this bin is an extra word. It compares to ben elsewhere, which compares to Yasru. So Yasru implies whipping, because in bin the Rasha, then we will whip him. Ashara lemotzi shemra minala. And how do you know you're warned against motzi shemra? Now in the Torah lists punishments, but it also lists warnings, because you can't punish somebody without warning. As we mentioned yesterday, if somebody doesn't have hasra, they can't be chayiv the death penalty. People have to be warned and know what they're doing. They have to be of sound mind when they do the avera in order to be actually chayiv for the avera. So what's the pasuk that warns someone not to engage in these wanton accusations against his wife? Rabbi Elazar mar miloi telech rochil. Rashi mentioned this pasuk yesterday. Do not go as a tale bearer. And in the Sefer Mitzvahs, they actually have an arichas about what this really means. Do not be a tale bearer among your people. Afal pishu omer emes. Even if it's true, it's still forbidden to say anything negative about any Jew. Not only that, hareze machariv ha'olam. This destroys the world. Avon gadolhu. It's a very large sin. V'gorem la'harug nefashos Yisrael. It leads people to be killed. God forbid. Like Doeg Adomi, who was bringing Rachel, and he got killed for this. And he says, v'yesh avon gadol mizeh ad me'el. There's an even worse avon. Hu biklal lavzeh. That's included in this category. Hu lashon hara. Lashon hara. He has a category of lo telech Rachel. It's lashon hara. Say amadaber begnus havero. Someone who speaks disparagingly, insulting of his friend. Afal pishu omer emes. Even if it's true. So this lo telech Rachel in general is you don't tell Reuven what Shimon said about Reuven. And lashon hara is just saying anything negative about anybody else. That's including this clause. He says it's even worse subcategory of this, even if it's true. And he says, and this is motzi shemra. Lashon hara is motzi shemra. And he says that it's compared to the big three, murder and arayas and avodah zarah, but that they taught that lashon hara is even considered worse than all of these. Now we understand not literally worse, but we said it's considered in a sense to be even worse. And he says there are certain things that are avak lashon hara, and you really have to see the Chafetz Chaim be'iyun, that there's certain categories of avak, the dust of lashon hara, that the Gemara says pretty much everybody does this, but not on purpose. God forbid, not on purpose. But it's very hard to avoid avak lashon hara, because you can say, oh yeah, Shimon, he's doing great, and someone takes that the wrong way, or then they take it like, oh, Shimon's got too much money, more than is good for him. Like we have to be so sensitive about how we talk to people and about people. So sometimes it's better not to talk about people bichlal. There's a saying I heard, I don't know if it's in the Shas, it's probably in Shas somewhere, but because it sounds good. And it says that small people talk about people, and medium people talk about things, their cars, houses, whatever. And great people, they just talk about ideas. So I've heard that there's probably something similar to that in Pirkei Avos. But if you avoid talking about people, that's great. They say about the Chafetz Chaim himself, you want to think the Chafetz Chaim, who was the baki in lashon hara, that he wouldn't talk very much. So apparently people who met him said he was always talking and chatting, how you doing, how's the family. He was always like playing Jewish geography. He was like a big talker because he knew all of the rules cold. So he knew like how to talk without being over any of lashon hara. So he was always talking to people. He was always like a very friendly guy. It's kind of an interesting thing. He wasn't like a grumpy old rabbi who never talked to people. He was like mamish with everybody talking because he knew how to talk without lashon hara. The Shari Tshuva here in Gimel, Perek Gimel, Kuf Yod Aleph, he says that, this husband who's accusing his wife, we call it Motzi Shemra. He's bringing out lashon hara on her. Lamaisa, he's also accusing her of infidelity, which she could get executed for if it's true. So I don't say, well, he's Motzi a claim of infidelity. No, Motzi Shemra, because this accusation on her reputation is even worse than death. Sometimes embarrassment is worse than death. And we find this also in a Gemara, and it's also coming up in about a year and a half, so it's kedai to have a preview of coming attractions. It's in Bava Metzia, Nun Tes, and it's a very famous, if it's not famous, it should be famous. So the Mishnah said, Kishem she'ona b'mekach u'memkar, it's about ona, overcharging in business deals. There's also anat devarim. There's also abuse with words. Imhaya bal tshuva lo yomar lo zechor masech rishonim. You don't tell bal tshuva, hey, remember you used to eat bacon. Imhu ben gerim lo yomar lo zechor masech avotecha. Remember your parents did avodah zarah. Shnamar ger lo tanu lo tachsenu. Do not abuse a ger. Do not press him. Then the Gemara continues. Says Amar Rabbi Barchan Rabbi Yochanan. Noach lo la'adam she'avol safek eishes ish al yalmi b'nei chaver b'ramim. It's better for a person to have intimate relations with a doubtful married woman than to embarrass his friends in public. Okay, no one leave. I need to explain this. Nobody leave right now. I don't want you guys to get in any trouble. So what he said. Okay, so Minalaz explains. So the Gemara is going to explain it for us. How do we know? Mi the Darish Rava, my dichsiv. He brings a pasuk in Tehillim about David and Melech. V'tzoli simchu. They're laughing at my limp. V'nesfu karu lo damu. And they're gathering around me, they're ripping into me, lo damu. They're not silent, but damu is also blood, as we're going to see. Amar David, lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is what David is saying in this pasuk in Tehillim. It says, Ribono sha'olam, galui v'yadua lefanecha. It's revealed before you. Shim hayu mikarin bisari. If they would cut my flesh, lo haya dami shotet. My blood would not spread out. Why? Because he was so embarrassed. Because his face turned white from the embarrassment that his chaverim in the base medrash were embarrassing him, as we're going to see. Not only that, we're in the base medrash, and we're not learning about Arba Misas Bezin. We're learning about Negayim, we're learning about Saras, and which skin blotches are Tameh. We're learning about Ohalos, when things are Tameh in a tent. Omrimli, so all the Talmidim in the base medrash. Remember, David HaMelech was a Rebbe in base medrash. He was a Kolel guy also. Not only the king, not only the warrior, the general, he was also a Kolel guy. And they were learning in the yeshiva, and he said, the students, they're telling me, hey David, habal eishesish mitasav b'ma, when somebody lives with a married woman, how do we execute him, David, huh? That's what they were doing to him. Yeah? Good. Ve'ani omer lahem, so I have to answer them, mitasav b'chenek, yes. An adult who engages in adultery, God forbid lo aleinu, it's chenek, it's strangulation. We said yesterday the nara mil rasa and the motzi shemra, that's a skila, that's an exception to Chiddush Torah. Typically it's chenek, strangulation. V'yesh lo chelik le'olam haba, but he gets olam haba. Of course, he had to do tshuva. He had to do tshuva for what he did, for the adultery. We execute him, and that also is a kapara, and he gets chelik olam haba. Aval hamalbin et pnei chavero barabim, someone who literally blanches, whitens the face of his friend in public. He embarrasses his friend publicly. Ein lo chelik le'olam haba. So in a sense, now don't run out of shir right now. In a sense, embarrassing people publicly is a form of murder. You're removing the blood from their face. You're embarrassing them. You're besmirching their reputation. You're accusing a maiden among Israel of doing horrible things. In a sense, it's worse than murder. Now, literally, they're still alive, so you understand. It's not exactly murder, but in a sense, it's worse than murder. We say, Ein lo chelek le'olam haba. The Gemara further brings Tamar, who was willing to die in a fire rather than embarrass Yehuda in public. So she said very secretly, with a message, Yehuda, if you'll admit, that's fine. And if not, she was ready to die before she embarrassed Yehuda. And that's why Tamar was Zocha to be the great-great-grandmother of David HaMelech, of the kings of the Jewish people. Is because we don't want, the king is in a leadership position. We don't want a king who gets to a high position by putting other people down. God forbid. That's not what we're about. We're about raising yourself up through avodas Hashem, through Torah and tefillah and mitzvot. We're not about putting other people down to raise ourselves up. We couldn't have a king like that. So this is the famous Gemara that shows you that in a sense, lashon hara, motzi shemra, is worse than death, which is why we call this misbehaving husband the motzi shemra, the guy who's making a bad accusation, not the guy who's trying to get his wife executed on the suspicion of infidelity. It's, that's also bad, but in a sense, that's not as bad as the Lashon Hara. So good, so the Azhara is from there, Lo Telech Rachil. Rabbi Natan Omer is a different source. Nishmarta mikol davar ra. Guard yourself from any bad happening. Now, davar is also dibur, is also words. So guard yourself from speaking bad words about other people. Rabbi Elazar, my time alo amar kehai mihai. So why doesn't he say that this davar ra is also the source? How can we baile Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair? He needs that for teaching Pinchas ben Yair. We just had Pinchas ben Yair yesterday. I got one nod. Baruch Hashem. I got two nods. I got a smile and two nods. So some guys were awake yesterday. Remember, yesterday we talked about the person who did a chetz, and then much later he realized it. He didn't realize it, and we brought the Mesilas Yesharim that you have to stop and think. That so many of the problems we have in our life are caused by that we don't stop and think. So much lack of tshuva is because we don't think about what we did beforehand or afterward and see how we can fix it. But the entire Sefer, the entire Mesilas Yesharim is based on one teaching of the same Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair. Remember, this is in Avodah Zarah, Daf Chaf, Say L'Shonam, Mikan Amar Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, Torah Mevi Lidei Zahirot. Torah brings you to be careful. Zahirot Mevi Lidei Zrizot. Being careful can bring you into being alacritous and quick. Zrizot Mevi Lidei Nekiyot brings you to cleanliness. Nekiyot Medvile Prishut, from separation from any bad things. Prishut Medvile de Tahara brings you to higher cleanliness, Tahara cleanliness, purity. Tahara Medvile de Chasidut, that brings you to Chasidut. Not with the white socks, but that's also good. Chasidut Medvile de Anava, that brings you to humility. Anava Medvile de Yurat Chet, to fear of sin. Yurat Chet Medvile de Kedusha brings you to holiness. Kedusha Medvile de Ruach HaKodesh, that brings to Ruach HaKodesh, prophecy. Ruach HaKodesh Medvile de Tchiyat HaMesim. So you can literally, he's saying Tchias HaMesim, the rebirth of the dead. So, but a person learning Musar, learning Mesilas Yesharim, can really bring himself back from the dead. If there's areas of your life where you're struggling and it's hard, start learning Musar, start with Mesilas Yesharim, go through the steps. This is the original 12-step program, and you can really bring yourself back from the brink. You can bring yourself back from the dead. So this is Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair. He does not need my haskama. He's amazing. He's one of the guys who's very Musar-oriented in Shas. So Pinchas ben Yair, Nishmarta Mikol Davar Ra. What does this mean? Mikanam Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, Al Yachar Adam B'Yom. Don't think about things during the day, and Kol Shaken, don't see them on the screens, on the phones, the TVs, the whatever it is, the magazines. V'yavo lidei tuma b'layla, because it can bring to a nocturnal emission at night, and you want to avoid that. So Nishmat Mikol Davar Ra includes this teacher of Pinchas ben Yair. We have to be so careful what we look at, achrei levavchem v'achrei einechem, because the Torah tells us very clearly, you start looking at things and you start desiring certain things, thinking about them in a more lustful way. It's not where you want to be in life. And if it was true back then, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, Kol Sheken, it's true today when sometimes we think I've seen it all, I'm kind of immune, it doesn't matter if there's a girl walking down the street, I've seen it all before. But the Torah is telling us, still be careful. Still be careful. Even though in our modern times, people are not as serious as they used to be, we still need to be even more careful. Kol Sheken, we need to be careful. Rabbi Nassan, my time, Alo Amar Mihai. Rabbi Nassan say Lo Tilech Rachil is the source for Motzi Shema, the Ashara, the warning source. He says Hahu Ashara lebezdin. That's a warning to the court specifically. Shelo Yehei Rach Lezei V'Kash Lezei, not to be soft on one guy and hard on another guy. Lo Tilech Rachil. Rashi says Rachil Lashon Rach Li. You can't be soft on certain people because they have a certain political position, a certain political party you agree with. You can't be soft on those guys and then hard on other guys because they have different politics than you. You can't do that. So the court has to be totally objective and not bring personal feelings into their judgment. Now, there's one exception where we're hard on someone. We mentioned it yesterday. Kalman, who was here yesterday? Masis. Thank you. A masis is somebody who tries to get other people to do avodah zarah. Now, in the masis, we have an additional mitzvah. Lo techaseh, don't cover it up. Lo techadem, don't try to find favor from them. But otherwise, generally, we have a pasuk hitzilu ha'eda. When people are accused of a crime, we look for their innocence. We look for evidence to get them off the hook and find them innocent and not execute them. As we said yesterday, as we said over and over, a bezdin that executed people every 7 years or even every 70 years was considered to be bloodthirsty and inappropriate because it's very hard to actually give a death penalty in Jewish law. So the court has to be very careful not to accuse innocent people or even to accuse people that might say they're not innocent, but maybe they're not deserving of capital punishment. The only exception was the masis, somebody who's tempting others to avodah zarah. That guy we go after with the full force of the law, and we try to get him. Good. Lo amar la'edim. So back to the motzi shemra. Lo amar la'edim. If the husband did not say to the two witnesses, bo v'heiduni, come and testify on my behalf, testify that my wife had engaged in immorality while we were married, hen me'idim melehem, and they come and they testify by themselves. Like maybe these two guys had heard something, heard some rumor about the wife. They haven't been told by the husband to come to court, but they're coming to court, and they're the ones accusing this woman. Who eino loke? So the husband does not get whipped. Eino noten me'eslam. He doesn't pay the 100 silver. And he v'zomamea makdim in the beit skila. But she and her edim zomamin go to beit skila. He v'zomamea. So that way, could it be that both the woman who was proven to be unfaithful and the edim zomamin go and get executed? Ela he zamamea. It's either she gets executed if it's proven with witnesses that she engaged in adultery while she was an Eish Ish during betrothal, after Kedushin, she's an Eish Ish, or the Zamami witnesses. If the first set of witnesses who accused her were proven to be false, proven that it never happened, the classic case is they testify, this girl was married and we saw her be alone with Philip, and on such and such date, such and such time, and then two more Eidim would say, hey, at that date and time, you guys were in Mexico City with us at a chasana. That never happened. You were never there. So that's a classic Eidim Zomamin. It could also be disproven. If there's Eidim that Philip wasn't in the city on that day that they say he was, they wouldn't be Eidim Zomamin, but still it wouldn't be proven, and the woman would not be executed. So it's either her or Eidim Zomamin are going to get executed, because for Eidim Zomamin, we give them kasher zomam lasos, the penalty they intended to inflict on their victim. That's how we punish them back. So the reason the husband here is not whipped and doesn't pay is because he didn't tell the Eidim to come and testify for him about his wife's alleged infidelity. Ha'amar lahu, if he did tell them, afogav de lo agrinu, even though he didn't hire them, he wasn't paying them anything to do so. Lefuki be Rabbi Yehuda. This excludes the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. The Tani Rabbi Yehuda Omer eno chayiv. The husband is not chayiv. Ad sheyiskor Eidim, until he hires these Eidim to come and support his false accusation. My time with Rabbi Yehuda, what's his reasoning? Amar Rabbi Abahu, Atia Sima, because the pasuk says, Sam la alilot davarim, he puts on her a wanton accusation. It says, Ksiv rachav, Sam la alilot davarim. The pasuk says he put on her a wanton accusation. Ksiv chasam, lo tasimun alav neshech, do not put on him interest. Malahalan mama, and just like interest is money, it's paying extra money for renting money. Basically, you're paying money to borrow money. That's neshech, that's ribis, that's interest. Afkan mama. So here too, this Psalm law, this putting on him is money. Now it's interesting that in medieval Europe, one of the only jobs Jews could have was money lenders, and it's an interesting historical thing, because sometimes it made Jews wealthy and powerful. To become a money lender for the king or the duke or the city or whatever it is, it's a position of power and influence to be the banker. However, it's a position of extreme danger, because if the king owes a lot of money and he can't pay, all he has to do is kick out the Jews, and then the Jews can never collect their money. So it's something to think about from a historical perspective, that was the only, because Jews were excluded from owning land, being in guilds, being in professions, being in the nobility. Jews were excluded from a lot of things, so sometimes the Europeans, the Goyim, allowed the Jews to be money lenders, not really for the advantage of the Jews, but for their own advantage, so that if they had to default on the loan, they just kick out all the Jews and they don't have to pay back. So it's something to think about with fiat currency and central banks. It's kind of like, being a banker could be great, or it could be dangerous. So that's why here in the Torah, we say, he pays 50 kesef, he pays 100 kesef. It's actually silver coins. Those aren't greenbacks, those aren't bitcoins, those aren't NFTs. Those are actually have inherent monetary value as a physical resource. So, something to think about from a historical perspective. Good. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, v'ken Tanei Rav Yosef tzidoni bei Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. That's bar Yochai. Atia sima. So he held by this drasha sima. So sima means money. Sama l'dvarim, we put on him money also. By Rabbi Yirmiyah scharin bekarka. So he's learning. He has to hire the Eidim. So they learn out. Bar Yochai also learns out if the husband hires the Eidim, then he has to pay the 100 kesef. If he didn't hire the Eidim, he wouldn't necessarily have to pay. Now, we might give him malchus anyway for making the accusation. We'll give him malchus alot telech rachil, we'll give him malchus mardus, but he might not have to pay unless he hired the Eidim. So the Gemara asks, what if you hired them with land, not with coins, like neshech, money, but with land? Or if you hired them for less than a sheva pruta, these guys work cheap. You see that false witnesses sometimes can be hired very cheap, apparently. Shneyem bepruta mahu. He gave one pruta to both of them. He's hiring 2 witnesses for 1 pruta, to buy one, get one free deal with the Eidim Zomimim, the false witnesses. Mahu, what's the din? By Rav Ashi, but Rav Ashi asks more questions about Motzi Shemra. Hotzi Shemra al Nisuyin Rishonin Mahu. What if this guy married Shprinza, divorced Shprinza, then remarried Shprinza? Okay, this guy's crazy. And then he takes her to court and says, hey, back in the first marriage, she wasn't a basula. She was unfaithful during betrothal the first time around. So first of all, the guy needs to shrink. But second of all, it's a shaila if it really applies, because it's a second marriage already. Like, you could expect that she's a bula. I mean, the guy was married to her already, L'man Hashem. So, mahu, on the su'e achiv, mahu. What about on his brother's marriage? This is a case in Yavamas. The brother did Kedushin, and the brother never went to chuppah, and Nebuch, the first brother, died. The brother did the Kedushin, and now his brother is standing in to marry this woman in Yibam. He marries her in Yibam, and everyone thought she was a basula. It turns out no. So could he make the accusation? Does Motzi Shemra apply to that case? Pashut Michal Chada. So we can't answer all these questions except for one. We can answer one question. The Tani Rabbi Yonah. Rabbi Yonah teaches, Et biti natati ish hazeh. The pasuk says, I gave my daughter to this specific man, meaning he has to be there. V'lo lezeh, v'lo liyabam. Has to be, the man has to be there in court. The original man who married her has to be the one making the accusation, and the father has to respond, I gave my daughter to this man, and he's making false accusations. So if the Yava makes his accusations, it does not have din Motzi Shemra. Of course, if she was unfaithful, she might still get a skila or a chenek, fine, but it's not a Motzi Shemra. So my Rabban and my Rabbi Ben Yaakov. So this was a discussion we had at the bottom of Amud Beis yesterday. At the bottom of Ma, we said that Rabbi Ben Yaakov did require the man to live with the husband, to live with the wife before making an accusation, to be technically a Motzi Shemra. The Rabbanan said even if he didn't, even if he just heard from 2 guys after the chuppah, they just had chuppah, mazel tov, the 2 guys show up and they say, hey, we heard something about your new wife. Yeah, and the husband didn't even live with the wife yet, he could still make the accusation according to the Rabbanan. So what is that teaching? What is that argument over there? Tanya, the Brisa teaches, Ketzad hotzas Shemra. How does it work, this Motzi Shemra? Baal Levezdin, the husband comes to court, Amar Ploni. He says to the father, this Ploni is the father, he's bringing the father into court. We're going to see why. We said actually yesterday, the father is the one who raised this girl, so if she actually did adultery, we're going to give her skila where? His door, right in front of his front door, Bosai. So we blame the parents for the actions of a 12-year-old girl. And we're going to see why. It's a very different society. Parents were considered to have much more authority over their daughters. If she had a curfew, the father was there with the baseball bat, making sure she was never after curfew. You understand, there was much more parental authority. So he's held responsible. The husband is basically taking the father to court. He says, Lo matzati lebitcha, I didn't find in your daughter besulim. And remember, from our introduction, this is a case where the father or the daughter had been saying, yes, she's completely a basula at the time of Kedushin when they did the betrothal and she became an Eish Ish. So now that she was not a basula on the wedding night, it means we assume something happened in the interim when she was a married woman. Im yesh edim shezinsa, if there are witnesses that she committed infidelity, tachtav, during the betrothal when she was an Eish Ish, yesh la kesuva mana. She has a kesuva of 100, not 200. Im yesh edim shezinsa tachtav, yesh la kesuva mana? The Gemara says, wait a second. If there's edim that she was actually unfaithful, she gets a kesuva of 1 mana of 100 instead of 200. What do you mean? Baskilahi, we'll give her a skila. She was a naira mirasa, and she was unfaithful, so the din is skila. Not that she gets a downgrade in her kesuva from 200 to 100. That's not the din. Hachi kamar. So the Gemara says, this is what the Bryce is saying. Im yesh edim shezinsa tachtav. If there was znus while they were married, during the betrothal, between Kedushin and Chuppah, skila. Then she gets a skila at the door of her father's house. Zinsa mikara. What if she was involved in premarital activities that were mamish premarital, before the Kedushin took place? So then, yesh la kesuva mana. She can't get the 200, the matayim, because lamaisa she was not a basula. But the mana she does get. Lamaisa they're still married if they have witnesses that she was, it's not znus, it's not infidelity because she's not married yet. She's just taking liberties. And again, that's not that's not kosher, but we don't give anyone skila for that. It's just, the problem here is the misrepresentation. Potentially he thinks she's a betula, she's not a betula, and therefore he's assuming that it took place during the marriage. But if it actually, there's eidim that took place way before the marriage, it was a one-time thing, she has her regrets, she was young, it was, okay, then it never happened again, never happened after the marriage, so then Lamaisa, she's not chayiv misa at all. So Nimsa Shem Ra Enu Shem Ra. So then his Shem Ra, his accusation, is not a valid accusation. Hu Loka, he gets Malkus, Venoten Measela, and gives 100 coins. Bain Bal, Bain Lo Bal. Whether or not he actually slept with his wife, whether or not the husband actually slept with her, doesn't matter according to the Rabbanan. But Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, he says there's a chiluk. Lo nemra dvarim halalu. These words only apply when elekosha bal, when the husband actually consummated the marriage on the wedding night. So then, because that's what the psukim sound like that we read. Bishlam Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So it sounds good. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Chaynu dichsev. The pasuk says va aleha. The husband came to her. That's usually a euphemism for intimacy. Ve'krav aleha. I was close with her. El Rabbanan my ba'aleha ve'krav elecha. If he didn't necessarily live with her intimately, what are you talking about? So the rabbis explain ba'alecha ba'alilos. So he came against her with accusations. Ve'ekrav alecha, came near her b'dvarim, with accusing words. Bishlama Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov inu dichsiv. So it sounds good. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The pasuk says, Lo matzati b'yitcha betulim. I did not find betulim, signs of virginity, in your daughter, because he requires the husband to actually consummate the marriage with her. What does that even mean? So they would explain, Lo matzati b'yitcha kashrei betulim. Adim, who can prove she was kosher. Now the Rashi explains, Adim that can disprove the accusing Adim. The husband's not showing up alone. The husband's showing up with Adim. They might be hired guns. They might be, cheap hired guys, bums, or they might be, think that they saw something maybe they didn't see. So if they can disprove the first set of Adim, they are kashrei betulim. They're upholding the faithfulness of the girl. So it sounds good to him. These are the signs of virginity of my daughter. Sounds like they're bringing physical proof, such as a stained sheet. How do they read this pasuk? These are the witnesses that show that the accusation is false. The witnesses that she was in fact not unfaithful during marriage. Okay, maybe it was before, but during marriage, definitely not. So these kashrei betulei biti, they're just as good as physical proof of besulim, according to the sages. You'll note that Rashi there in the psukim and the poskim, they learn the sugya like the Rabbanan, not like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. We do not require a literal sheet, we require edus. Parsu a simla. They spread out this simla. Simla could be a garment or a sheet or a blanket, something with physical evidence. El Rabbanan my parsu a simla. How do they read this pasuk? Amar Bahu parsu ma shesam law. So simla, they say sam law, what he put on her, their pirshu. They explain, he brings edus, brings witnesses to either be mizamim or clarify or explain what's going on. Pirshu ma shesam law. They explain what happened about the accusation he put on her. Recall from the first parak, there could be a lot of valid explanations why the girl does not have basulim. She was an avid horseback rider. There was a gynecological exam when she was young. There are a number of valid reasons she was not as he expected her that have nothing to do with infidelity. So if they have edus to this fact, they can be pirshu masha samla. They can explain the accusation he put against her. Kedetani, like the Brisa says, parsu asimla milamed shebain edim. This teaches that edim come shelzei ve'edim shelzei. Edim come from both sides of borin, and the judges clarify by examining the edim at the davar what exactly happened here. Kisimla chadasha, like a brand new garment that's perfectly clean. You got to clarify, dig through all the mud, dig through all the mud slinging, and see exactly what the truth is before we're going to punish anybody. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Devarim Kiksavan. He says no, it's exactly as they're written. Simla mamish. It's mamish. He would require physical evidence of betulim or lack of betulim. We're going to learn later that they would actually check the attendants shushbinin at the wedding. They would make sure that the girl wasn't carrying a bloody handkerchief into the bridal chamber with her, and the man wasn't carrying a white sheet with him, to make up accusations. They make sure everything's kosher. Have a guy go inspect first, make sure everything's clean when you go in, and you check it out. But that's only Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The rabbis say no, this is not literally a bloodstained sheet. It's edus. It's the judges and the witnesses and the parties working out the taina, clarifying, digging through the mud and cleaning out the ideas here so we know what actually happened. We know what happened and when, so we can figure out if anyone here is Chayav Skila or Malkus or Mama. Good. Shalach Rabbi Yitzchak, Bar Rav Yaakov, Bar Giyori, Mishmed Rabbi Yochanan. We have a teaching of Rabbi Yochanan. Afal Gav Shalom Matzina B'Kol Torah Kula. We never find in the entire Torah Shechilek Kosuv that the Torah distinguishes Bein Bia Kedarka Levia Shalo Kedarka. Between a normal, intimate act and a lo kedarka is, you understand, not the normal location, but it's a close location, but it's not exactly close but no cigar. That location, the Torah does not distinguish. Now Rashi explains because the Torah says, Mishkavei Isha Kasiv. When the Torah talks about a man sleeping with a married woman, it doesn't say mishkav isha, which is singular, lying with a woman. You understand there's no dirty words in Hebrew. So it says mishkav is a euphemism. It says mishkavei, plural, that there are two ways to be intimate with a woman, and both of them count, bakol mishpat arayot. Both of them count as a riot. So in Jewish law, if a man and woman are intimate and it's not in the normal place but it's next door, then that still counts as intimacy. And if she's a married woman, she still gets executed. That counts for all Kedas Din, but here is the exception. So it says it's not chilek bein bia kedarka lebia shlo kedarka lemakas onshin for any punishments ela motzi shemra chilek, but they make a difference by motzi shemra. Eino chayev ad yivo shlo kedarka, that the husband is not chayev to get whipped and pay until he lives with his new wife shlo kedarka in the unusual place. V'yotzi shemra kedarka, but he's accusing her of being a non-virgin in the normal place. Now this sounds strange. They're going to explain this is not the proper teaching. Kimon, who is this teaching like? Ikarabanan. If it's like the sages, afalgav delo bal bichlal. It doesn't matter if he had kedarka, kalo kedarka, even if he didn't live with the wife at all, and he makes the accusation, then he's really a motzi shemar, going to give him whipped and make him pay. Ik Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. If it's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, idivini kedarka v'ina. He would need that. Literally, the psukim say, I came close to this wife, the new wife, lived with her, I consummated the marriage, lo matzati betulim. It has to be the place of betulim. So the way to read the statement below is yivo shlo kedarka, yiv shema kedarka. It's even if the husband lived with her shlo kedarka in the unusual place, but as long as the accusation is kedarka, you would think it's valid. But he says it's not like the rabbi. It's not like Rabbi Ben Yaakov. He would require idi be'idi, amid base, kedarka, in the normal place, the place that has betulim, that has signs of virginity, be'ina, and that's what he needs. Elisholach Rav Kahana Mishmei Rabbi Yochanan, he says, no, that wasn't the proper teaching. Proper teaching is, Eino chayev ad sheyivo kedarka, v'yotzi shemra kedarka. He's only chayev as a motzi shemra if the husband consummated the marriage with the wife in the normal manner, and he's accusing her of not having betulim in the normal place that actually does physically have the betulim. That's when the din of motzi shemra applies. Now, I do need to clarify, because I don't know who's watching on the internet, that in Jewish law, the bia shalo kedarka is considered a full bia, as Rashi said. So if a married woman engages in that, chayiv misa, that's adultery, that's infidelity, even though it's not the normal passage. That's why it's called lo kedarka. It's not the normal derech. It's not the normal place where people normally are intimate between husband and wife, but it's considered an act of intimacy nonetheless. And we split hairs. We're talking about the Kohen Gadol. The Gemara asked about a Kohen Gadol has to marry a betula. So they said, what about if it's a betula, but she was engaged in this act of lo kedarka? Is she still a betula? So we said, technically yes, but for the Kohen Gadol, no. So it is an act of intimacy between a man and a woman, and if she's a married woman, it's a chayiv misa. It's definitely considered an act. So we don't paskin like the Catholics. We don't paskin like certain other religions that hold that lo kedarka is not real intimacy, because the Torah says mishkavei isha. Okay, you can't argue with the Torah. Mishkavei isha uses the plural for a good reason. Good. So the Mishnah, you're going to love this Mishnah, Rabosai. Ha'av zokai bebita. The father has rights on his daughter, b'kiddusheha, b'kesuv b'shtar bia, to get the money for a kiddushin. Now this is a daughter who's a naira or a katana. He can accept her kiddushin, whether it's money or a shtar or through bia. Now we have to remember the Gemara we pulled out yesterday, and not everybody was here. Not everybody's here, so we got to pull out kiddushin mem aleph. Kiddushin daf 41, where it says, right? Ha'ish mekodesh et bito kashi naira bo shlucha. A man can marry off his daughter when she's still a naira, when she's between 12 and 12 and a half, and kol sheken when she's a katana, when she's younger than that. But the Gemara here says, Rabbi side, do not marry off your young daughters. The Gemara says, Asur la'adam she'kadash ebito kashikatana. It's asur to marry off your very young daughter. Ad she'tegalu, until she grows up, she's mature. But Tomer plenty road say, until she grows when she's 12 and a half. Once she's 12 and a half, she has experience in the world. Baruch Hashem, she's bagros, she knows who she wants to marry. But at age of 12, asur, do not marry her off. Now remember, famously we said yesterday there's a Tosfos here. And the Tosfos is scary because he says, he says, nowadays, why do we sometimes have to marry our daughters even when they're younger than 12 years old? He says, because the golus is weighing on us very heavily. If right now you can marry off your daughter, with a dowry, with a wedding, with a simcha, maybe he's not going to have the means afterwards. His daughter will never get married. This was written during the Crusades. During the Crusades, it was not uncommon for an army to come through a city and randomly murder people, abduct people. They might, God forbid, murder. They might, take the kala as their, war bride, and they might murder the chasa, and they might take all the money that the father has. This is literally written during the Crusades. And that's why the Tosfos says, sometimes we need to marry off our daughters at a young age, which the Torah gives the father the power to do so, only because really the Torah doesn't want the father to do it, but in extreme circumstances where it's in the best interest of the girl. She might never get married otherwise. You have the money now, everyone's still alive, there's no crusades this week, Baruch Hashem, let's make a wedding, okay? Even though she's 11 and a half, okay? But the Torah gives the power to do this for these extreme kind of circumstances. I mentioned yesterday in Yemen, it was also done because the Yishmaelim, the sons of Yishmael, would commonly raid Jewish villages to take young girls into their harem. But if she was a married girl, they were much more likely to leave her alone because they didn't want the husband to come after them. So the fathers would contract a marriage, get a written contract of marriage, so the Yishmaelim would leave their little girls alone. So this was done, and the Torah doesn't want a father to marry off his young daughter before she's old enough to have input and say so, but the Torah allows it to happen so we can protect our daughters from worse things in life. Good, so Zakai b'mitziata, the father is Zoche in her mitzia, what she finds on the ground. She finds $100 on the ground, it's yours, Rabasa. And what she earns, what she works with her hands. And to annul her vows if they have an effect on the family. Mekabel es gita, and if she's still a young age, he can accept her get. If the father married her off at a young age, and then the husband wants to divorce her, he can be the one to hold her get, because a katana, maybe she's not old enough, responsible enough to hold it. But the father does not eat the perus, meaning if she inherited land from her mother's side, she had a grandfather, her mother's father, who gave her property, this young girl inherits the property, and the father can't eat the produce, the interest from this property. He has to hold it in segula, in trust for her when she gets old enough. This is an interesting thing because even though we're listing off ways where the Jewish law is patriarchal, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Jewish law is patriarchal, but we have here women owning property and choosing where their property goes. In many other ancient societies 2,000 years ago, for historical context, women were property. Women were literally property. Roman law, Greek law, Babylonians, all these societies, they just bought and sold women wholesale. Women could not own property. Women were property. In Jewish law, there are some rights the father has, lagabe the daughter, and then darim, and these are for the good of the daughter, the good of the family. We want to get her married off correctly, we want to get her set up correctly for life. But women are, it's funny to say, but Jewish law was way more liberal 2,000 years ago compared to anything else. And we also see this, there's many Gemaras where women ask about psukim, where women say, the woman should have read her get, she would have read the contract. Women knew how to read. Both like 2,000 years ago, even 1,000 years ago, no one knew how to read. But among the Jews, not only could the Jewish men read, even Jewish women could read. It's amazing. So, don't always compare what you see in the Mishnah, the Gemara, to what's the Metzias today. Compared to most of human history, Jewish law was very liberal, very understanding, very sensitive to the rights of all human beings. Just something to keep in mind when you're making comparisons. Good. Niset, when she gets married, yeser alav habal, the husband has more rights. It's not just that. Husband has more obligations. I mean, when a woman is not yet married, the closest man in her life is always her father. And the Mishnah here is saying a husband is even more. A husband, like the father cherishes, loves, protects his daughter. A husband all the more so has to do those things for his wife. It's yeser lovable.
So what are the additional things? If she owns land, he can use the fruits. He has to take care of the land, he has to take care of all of her investments or property, but he's allowed to use the fruits while she's alive. Good Chayiv ben Azotei has to feed her, Upirkona, and redeem her if she gets captured by the pagans. Kfurata, and he has to bury her when she dies. Rabbi Yehuda Mer Afilu Onich B'Yisrael, even the poorest Jew among Yisrael, Lo Yivchot Mishnei Chalilim, should not hire less than 2 flutes for the funeral dirge. Mikonenet, and a woman to cry, a professional crier. So they had this back then. You could hire a professional crier. She does funerals. I don't think she does weddings. Maybe she does a bris for the baby. She's a professional crier. So you see that a husband has to hire someone to make a proper kavod for the funeral of his wife. Gemara says, because of Minolan, how do we know father gets kesef kedushin when he marries off his young daughter? Amar Yehuda Markro v'yotza chinamein kasef by an ama ivriya, a girl who was sold into servitude. Again, the Torah does not want a man to sell his daughter to a rich family to be a servant. However, if the father's penniless and he can't feed her, then arranging this arrangement with a rich family, and hopefully they're going to marry her, hopefully she's going to become part of the family, that's to her advantage. It's also to her advantage, it's better, in a way, it's better than making a shidduch from a rich family. If she's living there and helping out with the dishes, and she gets to see what really happens behind closed doors. Because they're not us, we're in Daf Yomi, but there's plenty of families out there, they look great from the outside, but behind closed doors, you never know what's happening. So if she's an Amma Ivriya and she's living with the family, she gets to see how they behave, then she's going to know if she wants to marry into this family, and if she does, she'll be very helpful and very nice to them, and they'll want to marry her. And if she sees that they're really, God forbid, jerks behind closed doors, then she'll be like, nah, I want out of here. She won't be so helpful, and they won't want to marry her. So it's really to her advantage to be an Amma Ivriya if her father can't take care of her. It's really a last resort, like the Taisus said during the Crusades. It's a last resort. But the Torah gives the husband, the father in this case, the power to do so in her own best interest, to protect this little girl and make her taken care of and get her a good shidduch. Ein kesef ladonzeh, so there's no payment to this man who bought the servitude of the Amma Ivriya. Yesh kesef ladon acher, there is money for another man. Umanu, who's that? Avia, that's the father, could accept money for the kedushin of his young daughter. Ema ladida, but let's say it should go to her. Hashta via mikabel kedusheya. So we say, but the father can accept her kedushin money. Dichsiv et biti natati li shazeh. The pasuk by Moti Shemra. He comes to court. Remember, she's a naira. She was married when she was between 12 and 12 and a half. So the father was the one who accepted the kesef kedushin. He comes to court and he says, I gave my daughter to this man who's making these terrible accusations. Ihi shak lakospa. So he takes the money for the kedushin. A mahani mili katana, as we should say, that might only be a katana. Deleis la yad. A katana does not have a yad. Now, literally, she has 2 hands. God, we hope she has 2 hands, at least one, but we hope she has 2 hands. We mean she doesn't have a yad financial transactions. Since she's a katana, she can't make a kinyan. So her father has to be the one to take the money. Aval naira, when she's 12 in a day, isla yad, she has a halacha can to make transactions. Ihi to kodesh nafsha, she should marry herself off. She should have the right to do so. Ihi tishkol kospa, and she should be able to take the money. So we would have thought so, but Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Kinorecha Beis Aviha. When she is a naira, she's between 12 and 12 and a half, and she's Beis Aviha, she's in her father's household. She's part of the household. Kol Shevach Ne'orim Lehaviha. So all of the financial responsibility, whether it's profit or loss, whether it's paying for her food or accepting money for her kedushin, that's on her father. It's her father's responsibility financially for this girl entirely. How do you know that the handiwork, the earnings of a daughter goes to her father when she's a naira? When a man has to, God forbid he should have to, but if he has to sell his daughter to a wealthy family for servitude, just like this Amma Ivriya, what she does goes to the man who paid. So to the daughter, when she's still in the father's household, what she is working with, she's making clothing. She's not just sitting there watching cartoons. She's actually, helping out, washing dishes, doing laundry, whatever it is. Lamali. So how do you know? So we learn this from Ne'oreya Beisavia, that Kol Shevach Ne'oreim is to the Abba. But that pasuk is written by Hafaras Nedarim, that the father can annul her vows when she's young and living in his house. You say we should learn from this, the annulment of vows onto the money. On a famous statement, we don't learn money from Isser. That monetary law is distinct from Isser v'heter. So you have this concept of Isser v'heter, he can be mater her neder. That doesn't necessarily mean he accepts the money for a kedushin. That we learned from the Knas, that remember the onus and the Mafate of a Naira, the father got the Knas until she was a Bogeris. That was the last pair. Also, we don't learn monetary law, transactional law, from a Knas, from a financial penalty that Tori levies for some sort of sin. We might learn from Boshus Begam, the punishment, the penalty that a man pays for embarrassing or devaluing a girl that he abuses, God forbid, as you talked about in the last parak. Shiny Boshus Begam, that's a little different. The father is also engaged or involved in her Boshus Begam, because you understand, the father of a young girl, he's looking for a good shidduch. And if his daughter is beautiful and a betula and everything's great, he can get a better shidduch. And I'm not talking about like the father's not looking out for money, but he wants to get a better shidduch. He wants what's best for his daughter. So if his daughter gets, God forbid, attacked, and now she's considered less attractive by other men because maybe there's scars, maybe there's emotional scars, PTSD, God forbid. So that's also a problem for the father. It's harder for him to get her a good shidduch. So it impacts him, the Boshus and Pagam. I tell you, there's another reading of that, but okay, we'll stick to my pshat. Good. So really, when it excludes Ein Lo Kesef, it's Yetzia. It's going out of her shus. So going out of the shus of the Adon who bought her work. So there's Ein Kesef. So too, but by the father there is Kesef. It's excluding that. Kamamayit. So it's excluding when she goes out of the shus of her father through marriage, that the father could get money from the husband. But wait, these Yetzias are not the same. Going out from Rishus of the Adon, the master who purchased her labor, and the father. Once she's a Naira, or she pays the money, she's free to go entirely. But when the father marries her off, she still needs to go to chuppah to be fully out of his jurisdiction. But yes, from Chafaras Nedarim, once she has Kedushin, the first stage of a Jewish marriage, she's out of the father's jurisdiction for Nedarim. It's not like the Mishnah says, Naira Merasa, a young girl who's now had Erusin. She's had Kedushin, the first stage of marriage. Avia Ubaila Mafirin La Nedreha. Both the father and the husband have to agree to Mefer Neder, because she's sort of in between. She's still living in her father's house. She's still a Naira. So if she wasn't married at all, the father would have the right to annul her Nedarim, but she has Kedushin to the husband. So he also has a right. So they both have to agree to annul her neder. So a couple more minutes. Shtarabiyah. How do you know the father gets the rights to Shtarabiyah? If there's Kedushins through that way. Minalon, Amakra, Haita, Leish Acher. Haita is Lashon Havaya. Itkish Havayot, Lahadade. Havayot is a euphemism for marriage in the Talmud, in the scripture, in the Pesukim. Havaya often means marriage because it's becoming. Because people don't fully become people until they're married. We had a discussion about it in Yavamas. Okay, two more words. Zakai Mitziata. The father also gets what she finds. Mishum Eva. That's the top of Mem Zayin. Because of Eva, of jealousy. What's going on here is Rashi says if the daughter finds a diamond ring on the floor and doesn't give it to the father's going to be upset. He's not going to give her as much food. He's not going to give her nice clothing. It's going to impact their life. And it's an interesting discussion. Under classical Talmudic law, the father doesn't have to support his children after age 6. Okay, so after age 6, you don't technically have to feed your children. But there's a tshuva of Moshe. They asked him, can we use our Meiser money for tuition, to pay for our children's food? He said, no. He said, certain amounts. Okay, building fund is another thing. You can always use your Meiser for building fund or Bosa. You're welcome. But he said, because the minhag, our society is set up nowadays, that fathers, parents, they pay for their children even way past age 6, even in junior high school, even in college, even in medical school, even in law school. We're still helping our kids. Baruch Hashem, we're still able to help our kids. So we mamash, we continue to help our kids. So Mishum Eva, if a child finds something, then it goes to the father. The Tosfos brings, we say, Gabi Mitzias Beno, Abito, Haketoim, when your young child finds something, lo katan mamish. This is an interesting thing. Gadol v'samach o shulchan aviv zehu katan. Even if someone's grown up already, he's already in med school, but he's still relying on his parents, he's still called a katan. But katan, he's 10 years old, he doesn't depend on his parents for sustenance, zeu godol. In some ways he's a godol. So it's really interesting to think about, is somebody could be 25 years old, but they're still a katan in some ways. They still have to grow up in their financial dealings. Someone could be a katan mamish, but they're still very independent. It's something to think about. We're talking about, yes, the father is marrying off the daughter, that back then at age 12, the woman had no dealings with the outside world and was really relying on her father, sometimes older brothers, to really get her set up for life. So some of these rulings in the Mishnah and the Torah, they're really in the best interest of the young women at the time who had no other way to get a good shidduch and set themselves up for a good life. Have a great week.